This is From the Wheelhouse with Annapolis School of Seamanship. Welcome back, guys.
Yeah, good morning / evening, afternoon, whatever it may be. Yeah.
Well, right now it's morning.
Is it still? It's been a long day.
For another 10 minutes.
Yeah. All right. So this is our second time getting together. This is the third video podcast that we're shooting. Actually, the first one is coming out second, so it's kind of interesting. But we had great comments and great interest in the tariff video. We have a question. Before we get into this one, let's talk about, Matt, there's a comment that came in, or a question?
Yep, so this comment / question says, foreign registry sounds like a possible workaround on tariffs. I thought you could not enter a foreign flagged vessel into commercial service or charter in U.S. waters. What are your thoughts on this issue?
Absolutely correct that you cannot bring the vessel in and work it on a time charter in commercial service. Absolutely correct. There is a possibility of doing a recreational only charter, that is to say without the captain aboard who is controlled by the owner or the owner themselves. So we actually have a letter ruling that is working through its process right now to have some of that officially explained, but there are several customs letter rulings that indicate that it's absolutely fine.
Okay.
But only for the recreational, not for the commercial, not for time charter.
Okay, got it.
So,
well, we'll make sure I reply back to this user and tell him to catch the answer on the next podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this week, the one on that we did on making money with your boat will be out. So what we're talking about today will be out in the following week. All right, so today we're talking about a pretty famous boat crash that happened here near Thomas Point, and it's the one with this famous still picture of the powerboat sitting on top of the sailboat. And everybody's like, is that Photoshopped? Is that, no, it's not.
It's very real.
It's a real picture. And all of us were involved in this case in one form or another. For us, this was during COVID that we got the call. I think the accident happened before COVID, but we got the call from a California-based film video production company that was commissioned to create a video around this accident for Coast Guard safe boating, and they couldn't travel to come out and do it. So they called us and asked for some help, and so we produced that video for the Coast Guard. So that was kind of fun through an intermediary, and it was a fascinating experience. We recreated the whole thing, and
minus the collision.
Yeah, we didn't actually do the crashing part. But that was a fun project, and it was a time when we were eager to get back on the water. I think we shot on the very first day that boats could go back out.
Yep.
In Maryland. So, we're going to talk a little bit about leading up to that. Todd, you were involved in it as well, right?
I was, and this is where the lawyer's chorus comes to bear, because I have to say there is an NDA in the settlement agreement related to that. I represented the company that owned the sailboat, and therefore anything that I'm going to say today is all open source from public information, chief among which is from a FOIA request. You guys have the Coast Guard's actual report, and so all of that is public information.
Yeah, and it was all public information that we built the recreation around, and it was. I remember, Matt, you and I taking the AIS data and plotting it out, creating the relationship between the two boats, using maneuvering boards to establish the relationship between the two boats, and then we had to go set the boats up. We didn't shoot it in exactly the same place, but we shot it in the Severn River instead of out by Thomas Point. But we did put the boats in relation to one another the way they were in relation to the wind as well. And it was fascinating. You remember all of that?
I do. It was the conditions were very similar, and the way we set up the boats and started making the runs towards one another was really freaky at first. So it took multiple runs to really make it sync up the right way, because I think the first few times we bailed out
way too early.
Way too early, because it just didn't feel right driving in a sailboat at that speed. At that speed, so it took us a few tries, but it ended up getting it right, and it showed a lot of what was really happening.
The big takeaway, Todd, was and I was on the safety boat, so I wasn't in the shot, but I was there helping coordinate. We had a drone over the projected collision location. First few runs, Matt was in the powerboat. They turned away before they got into the drone shot. So, and it seems like when you look at that shot from overhead, that you're not even that close when you guys turned away from the collision.
Yeah.
But from the boats, it was insane. From where I was watching them come together, and from both the sailboat and the powerboat, it was scary.
Yeah, terrifying. I finally got to the point where I told the captain, who was my father-in-law, and I said, just go until you feel like you have to turn. And we got, I think, within like 25 yards, which was really scary at that point. But all it took at that point was just a little turn of the wheel and turn back, and we avoided the sailboat because we certainly didn't want to recreate that.
Yep. Wow, we really recreated this accident.
Well, one of the things, the top comment that I've seen from the viral video was, this has to be photoshopped. And everybody kept saying this has to be photoshopped. But there's an explanation. That vessel was super light. It was built, the powerboat was built to look like a traditional dead rise with Chrysler engines and very heavy. But in reality, it was a super light build, brand new, with outboards. And so everyone in the comments section would say, hey, wait a minute, I don't see that the waterline is all that reduced on the J105, and it has this tremendous vessel sitting on top of it, so it has to be photoshopped. Well, the reality was it was a new build that was super light and didn't really have the big inboard engines. And so it weighed a lot less than what you would anticipate on a classic Chesapeake dead rise.
Well, yeah, that does. And, we saw the boat. The sailboat was in the local yard here, and you could see the damage that was done to it to the side of the boat. It was remarkable. That boat was finished, I believe. It was total loss.
It was not sailing again.
Yeah.
You could look at it, and it had a perfect V cut into it from the powerboat. It was impressive.
So I was teaching captain's license. I said that in that video. I was teaching the captain's license. I was teaching rules of the road. And at the end of the class, I turned my phone back on. And of course, all the text messages started coming in. I'm looking at this. I'm like, no way. And I thought the same thing. I'm like, this is Photoshop. But then I zoomed in, and I could see that the whole side of the sailboat was buckled. I'm like, well, I think that's actually real. I don't know that somebody's going to take the time to go to that level of trouble. But recreating the accident, I think, was really, it was a little more fun for us to, well, first of all, no one was hurt in this accident, which made this more academic pursuit. And we weren't involved in the case. We were just on the video, which is a lot more fun than, sorry, Todd. I mean, it's just a lot more fun to be doing videos than it is to be involved in the case, like, as an expert. But we did use the same procedure. We recreated the thing, and I think for me, besides how scary it was on the water, was how long were we watching these two boats come together? It seemed like an eternity.
Yeah. I don't know. That they were going constant bearing, decreasing range of each other for quite a while.
So Matt, let's talk about CBDR, constant bearing, decreasing range. You need to give an explanation of that, because every time I explain it to folks, they are surprised to hear it.
So constant bearing, decreasing range, or CBDR, is when you've got two vessels that are maintaining that constant bearing or that constant angle and going towards each other, decreasing that range, which will sooner or later result in a collision. It's probably the simplest way to explain it, and that's what we did for this accident to recreate it, was just set up a constant bearing, decreasing range. So what we did is actually we lined up the sailboat with one of the stanchions up on the bow with the sailboat. And once we had that set up, we kept the sailboat in line with that stanchion, we were on a CBDR that was
all the
way in.
So when you're, as you know, Todd, because you're a sailor and racer, and if somebody's not moving relative to your viewpoint, I mean, you talked about eating trees as we use that, moving relative to the backdrop. Tell me about that.
Well, indeed, one of the things that you can do as a practical matter, when you're in a shorter range, it doesn't work as well in a long distance, and we do this in sailboat racing all the time, is you want to look at that background, and there's usually a few trees or something behind, and so we call it making trees. And so you're looking at the relative speed that the boat that you might be on a constant bearing decreasing distance is making trees, eating them up in front of their bow relative to the rate coming from the transom. If it's exactly the same, and there is no delta there, then you have a constant bearing decreasing distance.
So the really non-intuitive thing I found is that when a boat's CBDR, it has no motion from your point of view. It makes it a lot harder to see it.
Right.
Because it's not moving from your perspective. It's just getting closer.
Right,
Or
not
getting
moving,
bigger in the window.
not moving from your perspective relative to the background.
Right.
That
Because
we're
the two
referring
boats
to.
are coming together. So I think that the other interesting fact, the video, I wish I could remember the name of the production company that we were working with. I could probably look it up. But the guy called me and he said, hey, we submitted the video to the Coast Guard. And he said, every time we've submitted anything to do with rules of the road or collision to the Coast Guard, it's always come back with revisions like need it. You need to change this. You need to change that. And this was the first video he had ever submitted to the Coast Guard Safe Boating Office that came back with no recommendations or revisions. So I felt pretty good about that.
Good job.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
Well, on the day of stories, I had court that day, and the case was canceled in the morning. I'm back at my desk. I'm thinking, this is great. I have a whole found day to do work. And then the photo popped up, and I'm like, oh no, there goes the day. And I've sailed on Levitation, which is the vessel that was struck. I've sailed on that vessel for years, and so I immediately knew. I probably sailed on that thing about 30, 40 times, that particular vessel. And it was gone, never to be sailed on again. But the first thing I did, of course, is I looked at the photo and said, there goes the day. One of our local folks here had posted it. And then immediately thereafter, as soon as that happened, I received the call from the client. And I headed over to Eastport, which is a couple blocks away. We're in Eastport now, but the actual client is a few blocks away. One of the things that was key, and this is true in several different casualties that I've been involved with, is being there early. And so we were able to control the message, of course, on the internet, etc. But having my presence was able to control, to make sure there was no spoliation of evidence.
spoliation.
Spoliation, yes.
You want to cover spoliation real quick?
Short. The short version is, don't mess up and destroy the most important evidence, physical evidence, that will be used over the course of the next 3 years in the civil litigation and or criminal litigation in the event that there's a criminal aspect. And so, for example...
So you mean spoliation as in spoil? Don't
as
spoil
in to spoil.
Yeah, okay.
Don't spoil it. Don't mess it up in any way, shape, or form.
Okay.
And I have seen
Got
problem... Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I've seen problems where entire GPS tracks have been lost.
Mm.
Wow.
That's a big issue. And less so in state courts, but definitely in federal court, if you are deemed to have spoliated the evidence that is what everybody needed, then there's essentially, let's just say that you are swimming upstream because you will have been deemed to have taken out the most absolutely incriminating material possible and discarded it.
Mm. So the court doesn't like that.
The court does not like that, and it does not bode well for your ultimate litigation, one way or the other.
So I should have your business card on, right by the helm there in case. I have you on speed dial.
Look, I like capitalism, whether it's me or somebody else.
You keep saying that.
Yeah, you should have somebody. I have another file where there was a death, and before that vessel made its way back, while the Coast Guard is out actively searching for the body and the decedent, I received the phone call. And I made my way over on behalf of the owner. And thank God I did, because the vessel was coming out of the water and there were all kinds of line wrapped around the props. And they were about to start cutting away the line wrapped around the props. You can't do that in an investigation. I mean, before the investigation gets off the ground, you're spoliating all of the potentially relevant evidence.
Yeah.
Right.
So thank God I walked up as the vessel was coming out, because the owner, I stopped all of that. The lines remained. 6 months later, we have experts from the decedent's family showing up, and we're there doing the defense of the case on behalf of the owner, working with our experts. Had I not been there on the speed dial for the owner, all of that evidence would have been gone. Just an example.
It's a good thing you answered.
Wow.
Well, we do answer, and there's text, and we have a bit of a duty phone system to make sure that we can cover these things when they happen.
Yeah. So that was the case here too. You were on the case early.
Before the vessel ever made its way back to shore, before they were even disentangled, I was back at the client's office, took over the owner's desk, because the owner was then out aboard disentangling the vessels, and ran the op from there.
Yeah, the evidence was excellent. We couldn't have recreated the crash without that evidence. You know, we needed all that AIS data to establish speed and course and everything else that we needed to create the maneuvering board solutions that helped us set up the boats and set the speeds of the boats.
Well, one of the things that appears in the Coast Guard's open source data is that the powerboat's captain described at least 2 crash tacks from the sailboat just before the casualty.
Crash tacks, for those who are not sailors, are quick tacks.
Essentially quick tacks, one of which, if it had actually occurred, per the statements from the captain of the powerboat, would have resulted in a hove-to situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so
that hove-to is when a sailboat basically stalls itself with its sails and stops using sails against rudder, for the viewers who are not sailors. But yeah, so it didn't happen. What you're saying is that what he said happened didn't happen. It was evident from the GPS data.
In fact, the GPS data in the Coast Guard report, they have them superimposed. And so you can see the veracity is shown right there in the GPS data. And I have to say, this is another one of my best days practicing as a lawyer ever. The Coast Guard wanted to see on an exact sister ship model what it would have looked like on AIS had things occurred as the vessel, the powerboat captain indicated. And so in a nice 10 to 15 knot breeze, I was paid lawyer rates to go sailing with the Coast Guard for the day and do a couple of heave-tos and, do everything that is described in the statements made by the powerboat's captain.
So you got paid to go sailing as a lawyer?
Lawyer rates. I used to get paid to go sailing long time ago.
Different rate for that.
But there was a totally different rate for that than as a lawyer. So Nirvana day.
We'll bring this in for a landing here shortly, but Matt, I remember when you were reading the comments, and I said, Matt, you got to not read the comments.
Yeah.
Right? And that was on Chesapeake Bay Magazine's site. We just recently put the video onto our, didn't we? Yes, we recently put it onto our YouTube, but it has been on Chesapeake Bay Magazine's YouTube for 5 years now.
5 years. I think I started to read the comments about 6 months after we posted the video. I don't know why. I was like, oh, let's just see what people are saying about this.
You turned all red.
Yeah, it was a little frustrating. People, saying that, everybody knows that sailboats always have right of way, and then you have the power community saying, sailboats are always getting in our way. And then there's some people saying that I don't know how they could come up with, the conclusion that they made being that they're instructors.
Let me just ask you this, Matt. Who's responsible on the water?
Everybody. Everybody's responsible, whether it's your first day boating or you've been boating for 30 years. Everybody's responsible for the rules.
Right. I think it says that, Rule 2?
Rule 2.
Rule 2. Right after, who do the rules apply to? Rule 1.
Right.
And then Rule 2 is everyone's responsible. So Obviously, that leads to, we were not talking about it in this particular situation, but I remember that there was a lot of things there, and there often are people throwing around that term right of way. How do we feel about that, Todd? Right of way.
Right of way is overused by the vast majority of the public. Frequently, they either have a modicum of knowledge about what they're saying. Nobody ever really uses all the right terminology.
Mm-hmm.
I think that anything found in comments typically are worth where they're found, which is that everybody on the internet is an expert about everything, and therefore makes their comment. And even when they're wrong, they say it with a lot of force and vehemence, hoping that that will make it right. But that happens in the law too.
Yeah.
I've run into plenty of opposing counsel who don't know what they're saying, or they're completely wrong. And as long as they bang on the table enough, then maybe somebody will believe them.
They say it loud enough and long enough, you got to be right.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the old baffle them with BS if you don't have the facts or the law.
Right. Yeah. Well, that was a fun one, and it's almost, I just looked in my email, and it's almost exactly 5 years, almost to the day, right, that we were talking about doing that recreation.
Yep.
So, we've covered most of what I wanted to talk about here. Do you have anything you want to add with regard to that, revisiting that crash from all those years ago?
No, except that we were talking about the responsibility and the levels of responsibility between the two parties. Were we going to get into that?
We could. I mean, that's something that when two boats collide, it's often said that it's a matter of who is more wrong.
Well, as with any casualty, there is usually one or more factors that coalesce one after the other to result in the casualty, on most casualties. It's very rare to find that there's one and only one factor. Mm-hmm. There's usually a coalescence occurring at some point. And part of what's going on the legal side of it is that everyone is looking for something called contributory negligence. And the reason, at least in Maryland, and I think there are maybe 2 or 3 other states that still have this, is that under state laws, you can find a little bit of contributory negligence means there's no recovery for the plaintiff side of things. That's not true in maritime law. And maritime law, even in a state court, the state law gets thrown out the window and you have to apply maritime law. And in maritime law, it's not contributory negligence. It's something called comparative fault. So that there is a percentage allocation of fault in the course of that civil case. So you just, what we say in class to make it simpler for people is, okay, if there's a collision, it's possible, it's likely that both parties have some fault. And it's trying to move the needle through the litigation as to who has more than the other. But there are cases when only one party's at fault, right? I mean, it happens sometimes. It does happen sometimes. Most frequently, that will happen in one of those scenarios where it is a stationary object or another stationary vessel, which brings around something called the Oregon rule, mm-hmm. which is a presumption, just like spoliation is a presumption. That's a presumption that the moving vessel is the one that's at fault. Right, so you can't blame the bridge. I have had plenty of cases where the bridge has been blamed. I think we have been opposite on at least one of those cases. That might have been why I brought that one up, right? It could be. I feel like I won the battle in that one. But, well, I've also, there's a bridge over our shoulder here mm-hmm. that has dropped on several occasions. That might be the bridge we're talking about. Oh, yeah, we had 2 bridge cases. I had a bridge over on the Eastern Shore you guys were against me on as well. But on this one, over my shoulder, they've dropped the bridge on several occasions. Yeah. And it's been interesting. Let's just put it that way. I can't remember what my NDA says on that. So, yeah. Well, we won't talk about that. We won't talk about it. But there were a few we were opposite on. Well, you can't blame the lighthouse, right? Oh, that's the old adage
It's-
from the internet, right?
Yeah.
Your call.
Yeah, it's your call, Captain.
Yeah.
All right. On that note, let's bring this in for a landing. Thanks. We came up with a name, by the way, since the last one we recorded. It was from the Wheelhouse. So anyway, so that's all we have from the Wheelhouse this time. Thanks.